Universal's 1936 follow-up to their legendary Dracula hit theaters with all the fanfare of a whispered confession. Dracula's daughter promised audiences another taste of Transylvanian terror, but what they got instead was a villain who seemed more interested in brooding than blood-sucking. Countess Maria Zaleska, played by Gloria Holden, wandered through scenes with the kind of existential angst that would make Hamlet proud, but left horror fans checking their watches. The studio's decision to distance itself from Bela Lugosi's iconic portrayal created an unexpected problem. How do you follow perfection without acknowledging it exists? Universal's legal team had effectively handcuffed the writers, forcing them to craft a sequel that couldn't directly reference its predecessor. The result was a narrative that felt like it was tiptoeing around a sleeping giant, never quite sure whether it wanted to be a horror film or a psychological drama. Some critics of the era didn't mince words about the film's glacial pacing. Where Lugosi's Dracula commanded every scene with magnetic menace, Zaleska drifted through her own movie like a lost tourist. Her internal struggle between embracing her vampiric nature and seeking redemption might have been groundbreaking for its time, but many believe audiences crave the spine-tingling dread that made the original a masterpiece. The film's protagonist, Dr. Jeffrey Garth, proved equally frustrating with his scholarly indecision. Instead of a Van Helsing-style vampire hunter, audiences got a psychiatrist who seemed more interested in analyzing the monster than stopping her. This cerebral approach, while innovative, diluted the primal fear that made vampire stories so compelling. Despite these narrative stumbles, modern film scholars have found unexpected treasures buried within the film's psychological complexity, recognizing themes that wouldn't become mainstream in horror cinema for decades. 4 years after Dracula's daughter stumbled through its identity crisis, Universal Studios doubled down on a strategy that critics argue would ultimately doom their monster franchise. The Mummy's Hand arrived in 1940 as what many considered a shameless carbon copy of their 1932 original, recycling everything from tomb layouts to resurrection rituals with what observers called the efficiency of a factory assembly line. Universal's cost-cutting measures went beyond simple budget constraints. They literally reused footage, sets, and even costumes from Boris Karloff's acclaimed performance. The archaeological team discovering an ancient tomb? Check. The sacred scroll that brings the dead back to life? Double check. Characters who inexplicably ignore every warning sign and split up in the most dangerous moments possible? Triple check with what many viewers found to be eye-rolling frustration. Many critics felt the film's greatest casualty was suspense itself. Where Karloff's Imhotep had been a cunning, articulate menace who could blend into modern society, this new mummy, Karis, shuffled through scenes with what some described as the urgency of rush hour traffic. His predictable, lumbering movements telegraphed every scare attempt, turning what should have been heart-pounding encounters into what many viewers found to be exercises in patience testing. Some audiences reportedly found themselves shouting at the screen as archaeologists repeatedly made decisions that defied basic survival instincts. Critics noted the formula became so transparent that viewers could predict each plot beat. Tomb discovery, ancient curse warning, dismissive laughter, mummy resurrection, regrettable splitting up, inevitable doom. Yet film historians argue this very predictability has granted the film an unexpected afterlife. Modern horror enthusiasts often celebrate The Mummy's Hand as what some consider the gold standard of so bad it's good entertainment, where every recycled plot point and illogical character choice becomes a source of nostalgic charm rather than genuine terror. Universal's 1945 monster rally, House of Dracula, represented the studio's most ambitious, and ultimately critically divisive, attempt at cramming their entire horror roster into a single film. What emerged was a narrative traffic jam where Dracula, the Wolfman, and Frankenstein's monster competed for screen time like celebrities at a photo shoot, each appearance feeling more obligatory than organic. The film's central problem wasn't just overcrowding, it was the complete absence of logical character motivation. Dracula arrives seeking a cure for his vampirism, the Wolfman wants relief from his lycanthropy, and Frankenstein's monster simply materializes in the final act like an afterthought. Critics at the time noted how these legendary creatures, each capable of carrying their own film, were reduced to what reviewers described as a parade of familiar faces with no real purpose. Dracula's supposed quest for redemption clashed jarringly with his inevitable return to villainy, while the Wolfman storyline meandered through scientific explanations that satisfied neither horror purists nor casual viewers. Some speculate the studio's desperation to capitalize on their monster properties led to a script that read more like a checklist than a coherent story. The production's rushed nature became painfully evident in Frankenstein's monsters treatment. According to some accounts, his scenes were filmed in a single day with what crew members described as minimal effort. The creature's brief appearances felt so disconnected from the main plot that audiences were left wondering why he was included at all. Modern film scholars now cite House of Dracula as an early warning story about franchise fatigue, comparing its narrative missteps to contemporary superhero crossovers that prioritize spectacle over storytelling. The film's failure effectively ended Universal's classic monster cycle, demonstrating the perils of overcrowded narratives in cinematic horror. Two years before Universal's Monster Rally, The Ghost of Frankenstein delivered what many consider the franchise's most baffling twist. A brain transplant so illogical it left even devoted fans questioning the studio's judgment. The 1942 sequel's climax, swapping Igor's criminal mind into the monster's body, wasn't just jarring, it betrayed everything audiences understood about both characters. The transplant sequence defied basic storytelling logic. Igor, the manipulative hunchback, suddenly needed the monster's body to continue his schemes, but the aftermath exposed the twist's fatal flaw: the monster's sudden blindness, blamed on a blood-type mismatch between brain and body. This explanation felt so contrived that critics called it screenwriting desperation disguised as science. Longtime fans faced a monster who was neither the tragic figure they'd grown to understand nor the menacing Igor they'd learned to fear. Instead, the film offered a confused hybrid, stumbling through scenes with what reviewers called the coherence of a fever dream. The monster's established arc, his gradual self-awareness, was erased by a personality transplant that served only to shock. Continuity errors made things worse. Characters who'd bonded with the monster now treated him as a stranger, and his mannerisms changed without reason. The monster's signature walk, his fear of fire, even his gentle rapport with children, all vanished, replaced by Igor's sneering personality and a blind, lumbering body. Despite these missteps, film historians note that The Ghost of Frankenstein's absurdity has secured its place in Universal's monster canon, serving as a cautionary tale of how franchise desperation can turn beloved characters into parodies. "15 years after Universal's Monster Mash disasters, studios, including Universal and new independents, were still producing horror films that frustrated audiences in fresh ways. The Leech Woman arrived in 1960 with a promising premise. A woman discovers the secret to eternal youth, but critics called its narrative maddeningly circular and ultimately pointless. June Talbot's transformation from aging housewife to murderous beauty seeker followed a rigid, repetitive pattern. Seduce a man, kill him, absorb his youth, and repeat. This wasn't just lazy writing, it was a structural trap, locking both character and audience in an endless loop of diminishing returns. Each killing brought only fleeting rejuvenation, forcing June into a faster cycle of violence with no real character growth or story progression. The film's portrayal of aging women was especially tone-deaf, even for 1960. June's desperation for youth wasn't shown as tragic or sympathetic. Instead, she was painted as monstrous for refusing to accept her natural decline. Critics noted how the film reduced complex anxieties about aging and female autonomy to a simplistic morality tale about vanity. Some reviewers also criticized the film's depiction of its male victims, portraying them as universally corrupt and deserving of their fate. This created a world where everyone was either evil or foolish, leaving audiences with no one to root for as the predictable eliminations unfolded. Despite its flaws, film scholars now see The Leech Woman as an unintentional time capsule of mid-century gender anxieties, where fears about women's liberation took monstrous form, turning female ambition into literal bloodlust. William Castle's 1959 creature feature The Tingler promised audiences a monster that literally fed on human fear, but what many moviegoers actually encountered was a film where theatrical stunts mattered more than storytelling coherence. Castle's infamous Percepto gimmick, which delivered electric shocks through select theater seats during climactic moments, transformed what could have been a psychological horror experience into something resembling a carnival ride with narrative interruptions. The film's core premise, a parasitic creature that grows stronger when people are too frightened to scream, offered genuine potential for sustained tension. Many critics argue that Castle's focus on audience participation derailed the story at crucial moments. Just as viewers began investing in Dr. Chapin's scientific investigation of fear's physical manifestations, buzzers would activate throughout the theater, jolting audiences out of the narrative and into gimmick awareness. Critics noted how these theatrical interruptions created a peculiar viewing experience where the film's actual plot felt secondary to its promotional mechanics. The Tingler creature itself, a centipede-like parasite that supposedly attached to human spines, received minimal screen time compared to Castle's elaborate explanations of his shock system. Many viewers and critics felt the film was more interested in demonstrating its own marketing innovations than developing its central mystery. Many critics and viewers considered the story's resolution particularly rushed, with Dr. Chapin's discovery of the Tingler's weakness, human screaming, arriving so abruptly that audiences felt cheated out of proper character development. Castle's focus on spectacle over substance left fundamental questions unanswered about the creature's origins and the scientific principles supposedly governing its behavior. Despite these narrative shortcomings, the Tingler's legacy endures precisely because of Castle's audacious marketing approach, proving that sometimes a film's promotional campaign can overshadow its actual content so completely that the gimmick becomes the main attraction, transforming cinematic storytelling into interactive theater. The Alligator People, released in 1959, frustrated audiences with a transformation tale marked by narrative passivity. Joyce Webster's search for her vanished husband Paul should have driven a compelling mystery, but the film trapped her in a cycle of waiting, worrying, and being rescued, while the real horror unfolded around her. The premise, a medical experiment turning Paul into a reptilian hybrid, had potential for body horror and psychological drama. Instead, Joyce was relegated to reactive scenes, stumbling on clues by accident, relying on men for explanations, and watching helplessly as events spiraled out of control. This left viewers feeling powerless, watching a protagonist unable to influence her own story. Critics especially targeted the transformation sequences, which were meant to be terrifying but instead drew laughter from audiences. Paul's gradual metamorphosis into an alligator-human hybrid relied on makeup effects so unconvincing, obvious seams and awkward proportions, that they became unintentionally comedic. What should have been the film's horror highlight turned into its biggest joke. The film's reliance on melodrama over genuine scares created tonal confusion, pleasing neither horror fans nor drama lovers. Lengthy dialogue scenes explaining the science behind the transformations replaced suspense, while romantic subplots interrupted any momentum the creature scenes might have built. Despite these flaws, The Alligator People has found a second life among cult film fans, who celebrate its earnest embrace of a ridiculous premise. The film proves that sometimes the most sincere cinematic failures become the most entertaining disasters with time. The Brain That Wouldn't Die transformed a simple premise into an endurance test through its protagonist's methodical hunt for the perfect female body. Dr. Bill Courtner's obsessive quest to find a suitable replacement for his fiancée's severed head created a structure that felt more like a grotesque shopping expedition than genuine horror, with each potential candidate serving as another excuse for exploitative ogling disguised as scientific necessity. The film's repetitive format became its defining weakness. Courtner would encounter a woman, evaluate her physical attributes with clinical detachment, then devise increasingly elaborate schemes to acquire her body for his macabre experiment. This cyclical approach meant audiences sat through virtually identical sequences where the doctor's research devolved into voyeuristic stalking, testing viewers' patience with what critics described as drawn-out scenes that prioritized titillation and over plot advancement. Even contemporary 1962 audiences recognized the film's problematic gender dynamics. Courtner's scientific rationale for needing a perfect specimen became transparent justification for objectifying every woman he encountered, reducing potential victims to collections of desirable body parts, rather than complete human beings. The screenplay's treatment of female characters as interchangeable components for his experiment reflected attitudes that critics found disturbing even by the era's standards. Production constraints amplified these issues, with the actress portraying his fiance's disembodied head reportedly enduring hours confined in a prop box between takes. This behind-the-scenes discomfort mirrored the character's on-screen torment, creating an unintentionally authentic layer of suffering that the film's campy tone couldn't entirely mask. Despite its reputation for misogynistic exploitation, The Brain That Wouldn't Die has found renewed appreciation among cult film enthusiasts who celebrate its unintentional commentary on male entitlement, transforming what was once considered offensive trash into a darkly comic examination of toxic masculinity wrapped in B-movie absurdity. The Giant Claw delivered one of cinema's most jarring tonal shifts, when its carefully built atmosphere of dread collided with a monster that looked straight out of a children's puppet show. Director Fred Sears spent the film's first hour building real tension around an invisible aerial threat, with military characters earnestly discussing radar contacts and vanishing aircraft. But the reveal, a laughably designed giant bird, turned terror into comedy. Lead actor Jeff Morrow maintained a serious performance, reportedly unaware of how absurd the final monster would look. His reaction after seeing it became legendary. "I was told the monster would be terrifying, but when I saw it, I couldn't stop laughing." This disconnect between the cast's commitment and the puppet-like creature created a surreal experience, with dramatic dialogue about humanity's survival clashing against a monster resembling a demented carnival prize. The rushed production was a major culprit. Special effects teams had just 2 weeks to create the bird, resulting in oversized claws, googly eyes, and a comically disproportionate beak that moved like a broken marionette. Studio pressure to meet deadlines meant accepting this disaster, rather than investing in better design. Initially, critics and audiences felt betrayed by the film's earnest build-up and anticlimactic reveal. Yet this very disconnect turned The Giant Claw into cult gold, especially after Mystery Science Theater 3000 introduced it to new fans who embraced its unintentional comedy. The film's legacy shows that the most sincere artistic failures can become enduring entertainment, turning a creature feature catastrophe into a beloved example of ambition exceeding resources. The Black Sleep assembled a dream cast of horror legends, only to strand them in a narrative maze that squandered their collective talents through sheer storytelling incompetence. Bela Lugosi, Lon Chaney Jr., John Carradine, and Tor Johnson found themselves relegated to glorified cameo appearances in what should have been their triumphant ensemble showcase, with Lugosi's role particularly insulting. The iconic Dracula actor spent most of his limited screen time as a mute servant, robbing audiences of his legendary voice and commanding presence. Basil Rathbone's mad scientist, Dr. Cadman, anchored the convoluted plot about surgical experiments on unwilling patients, but the screenplay's attempts at scientific legitimacy devolved into pseudoscientific babble that confused rather than terrified. The film's central premise, using a mysterious drug to induce death-like sleep for surgical procedures, offered genuine potential for psychological horror, yet the execution became so muddled with subplots and exposition that audiences lost track of character motivations and narrative direction. The supporting cast of horror veterans received even worse treatment, appearing in disconnected sequences that felt more like contractual obligations than integral story elements. Chaney Jr.'s character wandered through scenes without clear purpose, while Carradine's brief appearances suggested entire subplot threads that the film never bothered to develop or resolve. Critics particularly condemned the film's abrupt ending, which abandoned multiple storylines without explanation or closure. This narrative abandonment left audiences feeling cheated after investing time in what appeared to be building toward meaningful revelations about the characters' fates and the Doctor's ultimate plans. Despite its fundamental failures, The Black Sleep endures in horror discussions as the ultimate warning story about wasting legendary talent, serving as a stark reminder that star power means nothing without coherent storytelling to support it. If you've enjoyed this video, please leave a like and comment. Also consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell to get notified of our new videos each week. Thanks for watching.